There comes a moment in every person's life when they realize something uncomfortable, something powerful. It's the moment you understand that your life is not being controlled by your circumstances, but by your mindset. And most people miss this. They wake up every day reacting instead of creating, waiting instead of moving, doubting instead of deciding, not because they lack ability, but because they lack clarity. And clarity changes everything, because when you know why you're doing something, you don't need constant motivation, you don't need external validation, you don't need perfect conditions. Your purpose becomes your fuel. But here's the truth most people avoid. Your mindset is not something you find, it's something you build. And it starts with a decision to stop negotiating with your fears, a decision to stop asking for permission, a decision to stop telling yourself one day and start saying today. Because fear will always be there, doubt will always whisper, but those voices are not commands, they are signals. Signals that you are stepping into something bigger than who you used to be. The problem is, most people interpret fear as a stop sign. But what if it's actually a green light? What if the discomfort you feel is proof that you're growing? Think about it, nothing extraordinary ever came from comfort. No breakthrough, no transformation, no new identity. Growth demands friction, and the mindset that changes your life immediately is this. You stop waiting to feel ready, and you start acting anyway, because readiness is a myth. Confidence is built through action, not before it. Every step you take rewires how you see yourself. Every small win builds evidence that you are capable, and over time, something shifts. You no longer see obstacles as barriers, you see them as part of the path. You no longer need everything to be perfect, you just need to keep moving. This is where consistency becomes your greatest advantage, not intensity, not motivation, but consistency, showing up on the days you don't feel like it, doing the work when no one is watching, keeping promises to yourself when it would be easier to break them, because every time you follow through, you're not just achieving something, you're becoming someone. And that's the real goal, not just success, but identity. A mindset that says, I am the kind of person who doesn't quit. I am the kind of person who takes action. I am the kind of person who creates, not waits. And once that identity is built, everything changes. Your standards rise, your habits align, your results follow, but it all begins with one simple shift. Stop asking, what if I fail? Start asking, what if I grow? Because the moment you change the way you see challenges is the moment your life begins to change. Immediately, everything powerful begins with a reason. Not a surface level excuse, not something you say to sound good, but a real, deeply rooted why that anchors your actions when everything else feels uncertain. Because when your why is strong enough, it doesn't just guide you, it drives you. It becomes the force that keeps you moving when motivation fades, when results are slow, and when doubt tries to take control. Most people start with what they want, a better job, more money, recognition, success. But what is fragile? It changes with trends, with emotions, with external pressure. That's why people lose direction so easily. Because they're chasing outcomes without understanding the reason behind them. Your why is different. It's personal. It's emotional. It's the story you tell yourself about why this matters. And when that story is clear, your decisions become easier. You stop hesitating. You stop overthinking. You stop looking for approval. Because you already know. Think about the moments when you felt unstoppable. It wasn't because everything was perfect. It was because you were certain about why you were doing what you were doing. That certainty removes distractions. It cuts through fear. It gives your actions meaning. Without a why, everything feels heavy. Every challenge feels bigger than it actually is. Every setback feels like a reason to quit. But with a why, even the hardest paths start to make sense. You don't see struggle as punishment, you see it as part of the process. And here's the truth most people avoid. Your why must be bigger than your excuses. Because excuses will always be available. You'll be tired, you'll be busy, you'll feel unprepared. There will always be a reason to delay, to stop, to settle. But when your why is strong, those excuses lose their power. They don't disappear, but they don't control you anymore. This is where discipline is born, not from pressure, but from purpose. When you start with your why, you don't need constant reminders to stay focused. You don't need someone pushing you every day. Your direction becomes internal. Your drive becomes self-sustained. You move not because you have to, but because it matters to you. And that changes everything, because now your work has meaning, your effort has weight, your time has value. You begin to realize that success is not just about reaching a destination. It's about staying aligned with your purpose every step of the way. It's about waking up with intention and going to sleep knowing you move closer to something that matters. But clarity doesn't come by accident. You have to ask yourself the hard questions. Why do I want this? Why does it matter to me? Who do I become if I follow through? And who do I become if I don't? These questions are uncomfortable, but they are necessary. Because the clearer your answers, the stronger your foundation. And once that foundation is built, something powerful happens. You become harder to stop. Not because life gets easier, but because you become stronger, more focused, more resilient, more certain. You stop drifting and start leading your own direction. You stop reacting and start creating. You stop waiting for the right moment and start making every moment count. Because when your why is clear, your path becomes unstoppable. Confidence is not something you are born with. It is not reserved for a select few, and it is not something that magically appears when life becomes easier. Confidence is built, and it is built on one powerful foundation: clarity. When you are clear about who you are, what you want, and where you are going, something shifts inside you. The noise fades, the hesitation weakens, and the constant need for validation begins to disappear. Most people think confidence comes first. They wait to feel ready, to feel strong, to feel certain before they take action. But that's not how it works. Waiting for confidence before gaining clarity is like waiting to arrive before you start the journey. It keeps you stuck in the same place, overthinking, doubting, and questioning every move you haven't even made yet. Clarity changes that, because when you are clear, you don't waste energy on unnecessary decisions. You don't second guess every step. You don't compare your path to everyone else's. You know what matters to you, and that knowledge becomes your direction. It becomes your filter. It allows you to say no without guilt and yes without fear, and this is where confidence begins to grow. Not from perfection, but from understanding. When you know your values, your priorities, and your purpose, you stop chasing everything. You stop trying to impress everyone. You stop adjusting yourself to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. Instead, you start showing up as you are, with intention and with focus. That kind of presence is powerful. But here's the challenge. Clarity requires honesty. You have to be willing to face the truth about where you are and where you want to go. You have to admit what's working and what isn't. You have to stop hiding behind distractions and start asking yourself real questions. What do I actually want? What am I avoiding? What matters enough for me to commit to, even when it gets difficult? These questions are not comfortable, but they are necessary. Because without them, you stay in a cycle of confusion. And confusion feeds doubt. It keeps you uncertain, hesitant, and stuck between action and inaction. Clarity breaks that cycle. It gives you direction. And direction builds trust. Trust in your decisions, trust in your ability, and trust in your path. And once you trust yourself, confidence is no longer something you chase. It becomes something you carry. You start making decisions faster. You stop waiting for approval. You stop explaining yourself to people who don't understand your vision. Not because you are arrogant, but because you are aligned with your goals, aligned with your values, aligned with your purpose. And that alignment creates a quiet confidence. It's not loud. It doesn't need attention. It doesn't seek validation. It simply exists steady and grounded, guiding your actions even when things are uncertain. Because clarity does not remove challenges, it prepares you for them. You will still face obstacles, you will still have moments of doubt, but the difference is you won't be lost. You won't be confused about whether to keep going. You'll know why you started, and that will be enough to keep you moving forward. This is why clarity is so powerful. It simplifies your life. It sharpens your focus. It strengthens your mindset. And most importantly, it reminds you that confidence is not about knowing everything. It's about knowing enough to take the next step, one step at a time, with purpose, with direction, with belief. Because when your mind is clear, your path becomes stronger. And when your path is strong, your confidence becomes unshakable. Fear is one of the most misunderstood forces in your life. Most people treat it like an enemy, something to avoid, something to silence, something to escape. But fear was never designed to stop you. It was designed to inform you. It's a signal, not a command. And the moment you understand that, you stop being controlled by it and start learning from it. Every time you feel fear, something important is happening. You're stepping into uncertainty. You're approaching growth. You're facing something that matters. Fear doesn't show up when you're doing what's easy, predictable, or comfortable. It shows up when you're about to stretch beyond who you've been. But here's where most people get it wrong. They interpret that signal as a stop sign. They feel fear and immediately pull back. They hesitate. They delay. They convince themselves they're not ready. And in doing so, they train their mind to associate growth with danger and comfort with safety. Over time, that pattern becomes a prison, a quiet, invisible limitation that keeps them stuck in the same place, living a smaller version of what's possible. Fear becomes the decision maker, but it doesn't have to be, because fear, when understood correctly, is not telling you to stop, it's telling you to pay attention. It's asking you to become aware, to prepare, to grow. It's highlighting the areas in your life where there is risk, yes, but also where there is opportunity. Think about it. Every meaningful step you've ever considered likely came with fear attached to it. Starting something new, speaking up, taking responsibility, changing direction. These moments feel uncomfortable because they challenge your identity. They force you to step into the unknown, and the unknown is where fear lives, but it's also where progress lives. So the question is not how to eliminate fear. The question is how to respond to it. Do you treat it as a warning that shuts you down, or as information that sharpens your awareness? Because when you shift your perspective, fear loses its power to control your actions. You stop asking, how do I avoid this? And start asking, what is this trying to teach me? Maybe it's telling you that you care deeply about the outcome. Maybe it's showing you where you need to grow your skills. Maybe it's revealing the gap between where you are and where you want to be. That information is valuable, but only if you use it. This is where courage is built, not in the absence of fear, but in the presence of it. Courage is the decision to move forward with awareness, not recklessness. It's the ability to feel fear, understand it, and still take action aligned with your purpose, because action is what breaks the cycle. The more you act despite fear, the more evidence you build, evidence that you can handle discomfort, evidence that fear does not define your limits, evidence that growth is on the other side of uncertainty, and slowly something changes. Fear doesn't disappear, but it evolves. It becomes quieter, more manageable, less overwhelming, not because your challenges get smaller, but because you get stronger, more experienced, more resilient, more in control of your response. You begin to trust yourself, and that trust is powerful, because once you trust that, you can face fear and keep moving. There is very little that can stop you. You no longer wait for fear to go away. You no longer need perfect conditions. You no longer let uncertainty dictate your direction. You move anyway, with awareness, with intention, with strength, because you understand something most people don't. Fear is not there to hold you back. It's there to point you forward. We live in a world that celebrates intensity, big moves, loud efforts, sudden bursts of motivation that look powerful in the moment. People love the idea of going all in, pushing hard for a short time, and expecting life-changing results overnight. It feels exciting. It feels dramatic. It feels like progress. But intensity is unreliable. It comes and goes with emotion. It depends on how you feel, how inspired you are, how perfect the conditions seem. And the problem with that is simple. Your life cannot depend on something that is inconsistent. Consistency, on the other hand, is quiet. It doesn't need attention. It doesn't need motivation. It doesn't rely on perfect timing or ideal circumstances. It simply shows up again and again, whether you feel like it or not. And while it may not look impressive in the moment, over time it becomes unstoppable, because consistency compounds. Every small action you take, every day you follow through, every promise you keep to yourself, it all adds up. Not instantly, not dramatically, but steadily. And that steady progress is what builds real, lasting results. Most people underestimate this. They believe that one big effort will change everything, that one moment of extreme discipline will make up for weeks of inaction. But real growth doesn't work that way. It's not built in moments, it's built in patterns, and patterns require repetition. That's where consistency becomes powerful. It turns effort into habit. It turns actions into identity. It turns goals into reality, not because you did something extraordinary once, but because you did something meaningful repeatedly. This is where most people struggle, not because they are incapable, but because they are impatient. They don't see immediate results, so they stop. They don't feel excited, so they pause. They don't feel motivated, so they quit. And in doing so, they break the very process that would have led them forward. Consistency demands something different. It demands discipline over emotion, commitment over convenience. It asks you to show up on the days when it feels pointless, on the days when progress is invisible, on the days when it would be easier to do nothing, because those are the days that matter most. Anyone can work hard when they feel inspired. Anyone can push forward when the energy is high. But not everyone can continue when it's quiet, when it's slow, when it feels like nothing is changing. That's where separation happens. That's where identity is built. Because every time you choose consistency, you are reinforcing a belief about yourself. You are proving that you are reliable, that you are disciplined, that you are someone who follows through, and that belief becomes your foundation. Over time, something shifts. You no longer rely on motivation to take action. You no longer need to convince yourself to start. It becomes automatic, part of who you are, not just something you do. And that's when consistency transforms into power, not loud power, not visible power, but a deep, unshakable strength that carries you forward regardless of circumstances. Because while intensity can create a spark, consistency builds the fire, and that fire doesn't fade with emotion. It doesn't disappear with doubt. It continues, steady and controlled, shaping your path day by day. This is how real success is built, not in dramatic moments, but in daily decisions. Not in sudden breakthroughs, but in continuous effort. Not in what you do once, but in what you refuse to stop doing. So instead of asking how hard you can go for a short time, ask yourself something more powerful. How long can you stay committed to the process? Because in the end, it's not the intensity of your effort that defines your results. It's the consistency of your actions that defines who you become. Whether you realize it or not, your environment is constantly influencing you. Every conversation you hear, every piece of content you consume, every person you spend time with, it's all shaping the way you think. And the way you think shapes the way you act. Which means your environment is not just around you, it's within you. Most people ignore this. They focus on changing their goals, their habits, their routines, but they stay in the same environment that created their limitations in the first place. And then they wonder why nothing changes, why motivation fades, why discipline feels difficult, why progress feels slow, because environment is stronger than intention. You can have the best plans in the world, but if you are surrounded by negativity, distraction, and low standards, it will slowly pull you back. Not all at once, not dramatically, but consistently. And over time, that influence becomes your normal. You start thinking like the people around you. You start accepting what you once questioned. You start settling in ways you once resisted. That's how powerful environment is. But the opposite is also true. When you intentionally place yourself in a better environment, one that challenges you, inspires you, and pushes you to grow, your mindset begins to shift without force. You don't have to constantly fight for motivation. You don't have to rely only on willpower. Growth becomes natural because it's supported by what surrounds you. This is why exposure matters. If you are constantly exposed to people who think bigger, act with purpose, and hold themselves to higher standards, you begin to rise to that level. Not because you are trying to impress them, but because your perception of what's possible expands, your limits change. What once felt difficult starts to feel normal. What once felt impossible starts to feel achievable. And what once felt intimidating starts to feel necessary. That's the power of a strong environment. But here's the truth. Your environment is not just physical. It's digital. It's emotional. It's mental. What you watch every day, what you listen to, what you scroll through, the conversations you engage in, the thoughts you allow to stay in your mind, all of it matters because your brain is always absorbing, always adapting, always forming beliefs based on repeated exposure. And those beliefs become your reality. If you constantly consume negativity, you will start to see problems everywhere. If you surround yourself with doubt, you will begin to question your own ability. If you stay in spaces that limit you, you will eventually limit yourself, not because you lack potential, but because your environment is shaping your perception. And perception drives action. This is why taking control of your environment is one of the most powerful decisions you can make. Not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. It might mean creating distance from people who drain your energy. It might mean choosing growth over comfort. It might mean stepping into spaces where you feel challenged, even uncomfortable. But that discomfort is not a sign you're in the wrong place. It's a sign you're expanding. Because the right environment will not always feel easy, but it will always make you better. And as your environment improves, your mindset strengthens. You begin to think with more clarity, you act with more intention, you believe in possibilities you once ignored, and slowly your life starts to reflect those changes. Not because something external magically changed, but because your internal world evolved. That's how transformation happens. Not by forcing yourself to think differently, but by placing yourself in environments that make better thinking unavoidable. Because at the end of the day, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your environment. And when your environment is strong, your mindset becomes unstoppable. There is a lie that holds more people back than failure ever could. The belief that you need to feel ready before you take action. It sounds logical, it feels safe, it gives you a reason to wait, to prepare, to delay just a little longer. But the truth is, readiness is not a requirement for action. It is a result of it. Most people spend their lives waiting for confidence, waiting for the perfect moment, waiting for certainty that everything will work out. And while they wait, opportunities pass. Time moves, potential fades into hesitation. Not because they are incapable, but because they are stuck in the illusion that one day they will wake up and feel completely prepared. That day never comes, because readiness is not something you feel, it's something you build, and you build it by moving. Every step you take without feeling ready rewires your mind. It challenges the story that says you can't. It proves that action is possible even in the presence of doubt. And with every small move forward, you begin to create something powerful, momentum. Momentum doesn't come from thinking. It doesn't come from planning. It comes from doing. This is why action matters more than emotion. If you rely on how you feel, you will always find a reason to wait. You'll feel tired, you'll feel uncertain, you'll feel unprepared, and those feelings will convince you that now is not the right time. But if you act despite those feelings, everything changes, because action creates clarity. When you move, you learn. When you try, you understand. When you step forward, you gain perspective that no amount of thinking could ever give you. And that clarity builds confidence, not fake confidence, not temporary motivation, but real, grounded belief in your ability to handle what comes next. Because you've already started. You've already faced the unknown. You've already proven that you are capable of moving forward, even when it's uncomfortable. That's where growth begins, not in the comfort of preparation, but in the uncertainty of action. And yes, it will feel uncomfortable. You will question yourself. You will doubt your decisions. You will feel like you're not enough, like you don't know enough, like you should wait just a little longer. But those thoughts are not truth. They are resistance. Resistance to change. Resistance to growth. Resistance to becoming someone new. Because acting before you feel ready requires you to step beyond your current identity. It asks you to become the person you've been thinking about, but haven't yet decided to be. And that decision is powerful, because once you act, you shift from possibility to reality. You stop imagining what could happen and start experiencing what is happening. You stop watching from the sidelines and start participating in your own life. That's where transformation happens. Not in perfect conditions, but in imperfect action. Over time, something changes. What once felt intimidating becomes familiar. What once felt impossible becomes manageable. What once felt overwhelming becomes part of your routine. Not because the challenge disappeared, but because you grew into it. And that growth only happens through action. So instead of asking yourself if you're ready, ask yourself something more honest. Are you willing to try, willing to fail, willing to learn, willing to keep going even when it feels uncertain? Because willingness creates movement, and movement creates progress, and progress, no matter how small, will always take you further than waiting ever will. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need to feel confident. You don't need perfect timing. You just need to start. Because the moment you act, even without feeling ready, is the moment your life begins to change.